Perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, greetings, everyone. We are really excited to be sharing with you today, bringing the well-architected framework to life, some real-world Salesforce decisions. Before we get started, we want to, of course, thank our sponsors, the Trailblazer community and PDF Butler, for making this event possible. We know that we couldn't bring the community together without our sponsor support, so we really appreciate that. To get us started, I'd like to introduce ourselves. Diego, why don't you get us introduce yourself first?
Thanks, Arturo. My name is Diego Castro. I'm currently operating Culminate, which is a boutique Salesforce consulting firm that specializes in custom development and integrations for financial services, healthcare, and the technology sectors. Before that, I spent several years as a Salesforce developer in these industries. Thank you, Arturo. Your turn.
And also in San Antonio, Texas, my name is Arturo Ordoqui. I've been in the ecosystem focusing on nonprofits since 2010, and really excited to be sharing some of the experiences I've had and heard about as a community group leader here in San Antonio. So we're going to kind of start off today with reviewing what does well-architected mean. Diego and I are then going to share some real life experiences that we've had in projects, and then share what we learned, and then take some questions from y'all as we go through. So to kick us off, Diego, why don't you remind the audience about what well-architected framework is?
Sounds good. So it's no surprise that if you've ever built anything in Salesforce, you've had to make some technical trade-offs. And I wouldn't be surprised if over time you develop your own points of view on how to build solutions in Salesforce. And in that time, you've probably checked if Salesforce has their own point of view on how things should be built. At least from a development perspective, I was looking for things more than the idea, the best practices to bulkify your code and don't hard code your IDs, or don't do any sort of DMLs in a for loop. And as it turns out, Salesforce now has their own point of view of these quote unquote well-architected principles that should guide how you actually build solutions on the platform. It's basically a framework for what Salesforce defines as healthy solutions. And in addition, it's also a set of white papers that contain these patterns and anti-patterns on how to approach solutions on the Salesforce platform. So what we're going to do next, as Arturo had mentioned earlier, is share some of these real world scenarios that we've experienced in our time in the ecosystem, some of the learnings that we had along the way, and then how some of our thought processes actually at the time aligned with, or like how our thought processes aligned with or did not align with some of the way that Salesforce has their current prescriptions on what it means to build healthy solutions on the platform. Let's see. Yes. All right. Thank you, Arturo. So what I'll do now, oh, I realize it's my turn to present the story. So one of the stories that I wanted to talk about, one of the real world scenarios that we've experienced in the past is the following. Let's say that you're working for a company and the CFO of the company wants to streamline this quote and order processing function within Salesforce. Imagine it takes a long time for reps to quote deals, sometimes 30 minutes to an hour, just to generate quotes. And it takes a long time to do renewals as well. We would have CSMs, let's say they were taking 2 hours a week to manually send renewals, and you still have the C-suite that's still signing these deals that are small in size, and it's taking up valuable executive time. So the Salesforce team has this idea. All right, let's figure out a way to automate a good chunk of the renewals process for the business. And so after some time, they come up with the idea of writing asynchronous Apex, and then leveraging the e-signature tool that they use to sign documents, use their APIs to automate the sending of renewals. So you can imagine you have a process that generates the quote, identifies who the signatories are, sends that out, all without a customer success manager doing any sort of work for specific types of deals. Now, the internal team knows which which e-signature API endpoints they need to hit. However, this e-signature company, they just released this Apex toolkit for their API. And I want you to think about this Apex toolkit basically as an encapsulation of several Apex classes that will invoke the e-signature API on your behalf. So you don't have to write a bunch of code to do it. You would theoretically just implement the Apex toolkit, invoke the proper methods, and you'd be on your way. And to add some color to this, the CFO mandated that there's a tight deadline to complete this by next quarter, right? So let's say you're a developer, the design would assume that you would use this API wrapper. You would build this API wrapper on your own, but the engineering director thinks that you'd save time by using the product's newly built API toolkit. The question is which approach should the developers adopt? Should they develop their own custom API wrapper and write a bunch of code, or they're not going to write as much code because they're going to use this API toolkit that will contain all the invocations of the API endpoints that we were going to write in the with the Apex API wrapper. So that's sort of the question. And ultimately, what we ended up doing was deciding on just writing our custom Apex API wrapper and not using the API toolkit. You might be wondering, well, why would you do that when this e-signature company just released this thing that would prevent you from writing a bunch of code? Well, as it turns out, that API toolkit, while it did 80% of the things that we needed it to do, it didn't do 20%. It didn't do the 20% that was an absolute non-negotiable to have in our solution. And so because of that 20%, while you might say, okay, great, if a managed package or a solution can do 80% of the things that you need, and it doesn't do the 20%, that might be normally fine. But in this case, it was a necessity. So we ended up having to write the custom Apex API wrapper, and then find out from the e-signature APIs, the company, when the toolkit would reach feature parity with the API endpoints that they already had. So that was the crux of it. I'm trying to think of what else that came to mind for us there. There was also this need for speed to get this out pretty quickly. So that's what we ended up deciding to do. And that's an encapsulation that answers the question: do we do a custom build, or do we use a toolkit here? And we ended up going for a custom build approach here. Arturo, I'm gonna hand it off to you for the next story.
Great, thanks, Diego. So my situation, somewhat similar in that we had to do with a managed package, and in the situation that I was working with, we had an organization that was looking to build a custom app and had provided us some requirements. Similar to Diego's story, there was kind of some hard, fast items there, and the engineering team met to discuss what the architecture for our custom app and the Experience Cloud portal that we would be providing to the clients would look like. And so there were several requirements that the client wanted, but the two main decision points centered around the request for the solution to be built to allow for future integrations with other systems and not have required dependencies on any particular technology that they wanted to integrate with. They also had just completed a migration to a managed package to support their in-person services. and the portal was going to be able to support their kind of more virtual on-demand services and after hours. The discussion focused on whether we should utilize the managed package as the foundation, because as we know, when we're working with managed packages, we don't always have full visibility to some of the triggers and apex and logic behind. We don't have control over the roadmap and what possible changes could occur in the managed package. And so the question really came, like, do we build on that foundation, or do we build the standalone data model to maintain the portability and independence that the client stated was a very important goal for them? In the end, the decision and the agreement reached with the client was that we would use the managed package as the foundation, with the understanding that it did reduce and limit some of the portability and independence that they were seeking. But in the end, we feel like this was the right approach for a few different factors. First off, the cost for the organization, being able to have a starting point, kind of like Diego was saying, that met 80%, and in this case, that 80% was what was necessary for the project to be able to move forward. But we also looked at the overall support needs for the organization and what it would mean to have to support two different processes for their end users and their external end users, as well as the culture of the organization. What was it like to reflect, to build in, streamline efficiencies into their Salesforce environment, and wanting to make sure that, we built the right architecture for them, even though we did in the end have to work with them to kind of compromise on some of those initial requirements. So you may be thinking to yourself, what do these scenarios that we've shared have to do with the well-architected framework and making architectural decisions? So sometimes there are themes that come up in our projects and our decisions. Sometimes they're complementary, sometimes they conflict with each other. As Diego shared at the start of the presentation, and as Salesforce often does, we have to make our implementations based on the decisions and the information available at the time, right? We all are very familiar with the safe harbor and forward-looking statements that Salesforce and many webinars have. And this also applies to the well-architected framework. And, on the screen now, you see some of the themes that Diego and I identified as we kind of discuss these two scenarios, as well as other scenarios that we've come across in our last more than 8 years working in the ecosystem. One thing we want to share about these themes, and we're going to go a little deeper into them in just a moment, is that these are not hard, fast, this or that type of situations. These are a spectrum of items that apply to your organization. Diego, do you want to kind of talk about some of the themes that you saw in your presentation or in your scenario, and share how those kind of surfaced in your decision making?
Sure. So one theme was maturity, and it was maturity both from a vendor side and from an internal business process and company maturation perspective. So sometimes there's risks to implementing a new product, right? It's or in this case, a new toolkit, even if it is from a relatively mature corporation. Internally, at the time, we were trying to mature our business processes and implement solutions or customize solutions in Salesforce that are based on a mature and optimized business process. And then additionally, like the whole reason we were doing this in the first place was to give some speed and speed up how the speed up the time it takes or it took for reps to quote and actually send out deals. And in addition, we were trying to do this on a relatively quick deadline. So there's speed both from we're trying to make things faster for our internal users, and then additionally we were trying to do this relatively quickly. And then there's this maintenance and support theme that also surfaced as well. So if the original pilot was going to be if the original pilot to automate a subset, a small set, a small subset of deals, if that was successful, then we were likely going to continue to roll this out to a larger subset of those deals. And the question is what is the maintenance involved in setting that up, and how can we help support? How can we help staff and support um, uh, uh, the team such that if there are issues that arise with a larger amount of with a larger subset of deals, would the team be able to kind of help be there to support it? And then in addition, like how resilient is the solution going to be as we continue to scale it and increase the deal size of the subset of deal sizes that was going through this automation? Arturo, what about you? What kind of themes did you see when you were going through it yourself?
Yeah. As I mentioned, for the organization we were working with, the culture was really important. Their director of information technology, or director of technology, really had established a strong culture where the needs of their internal team members, the end users, the staff members, as well as the external partners. And in this case, we were working with a nonprofit organization that relied on a lot of volunteers out in the community to help expand their reach and services. So we knew that we needed to build a streamlined and consistent experience across the programs that would be really important to the organization to maintain their culture. We couldn't have a special program that was managed in a different way than the others. And of course, having different programs tied into the support. It wasn't just the need to support the tool that was being built and the maintenance, kind of like to the in the ways that Diego's story was. For ours, it was really building on the managed package that we knew was actually really well supported. It had a great community around it. So the organization would be able to benefit from that additional support and resources to reach out to if they had questions, if they needed some training materials. We also knew that the fact that they already had some familiarity with the foundational managed package would mean that we could leverage some of that for training materials, our ramp up time to support the staff and the volunteers on how to use the new tool would be reduced. And so those really played into some of the benefits of going with a managed package as the foundation for something that was so crucial for the organization. And of course, these things tap into the cost of building application. And yes, we all know about the direct cost of licensures, time and materials to build. But really, when we started looking into this, one of the costs that really surfaced was, as Diego kind of shared with me when we were talking, the swivel chair effect. The fact of having to context switch, when you're managing programs. When you were managing the programs, you would have to be in one environment. If we built it separate, you'd have to switch into a different environment that had a slightly different look and feel, and structure, and it could be very confusing for the end users. And this goes into what a friend of ours here in San Antonio and Salesforce MVP, Joseph Kuban, talks about in some of his presentations as the total cost of ownership. It's not just the licensing and time and materials, but what are those intrinsic costs when we're looking at building the solutions for the long term? And so those factors really played into our decision, and being able to talk with the client to say, like, look, we understand that you had some requirements of portability and independence, but we need to look at some of these impacts of that. And that's how we were able to get them to kind of make some concessions there in certain ways. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Diego, Arturo, these are great, but how does this apply to the well-architected framework that we started out by sharing? So one of the things that we really wanted to share is that these are not hard, again, not hard, fast, this or that kind of themes. These are a spectrum and a scale. Diego, do you want to kind of talk about how some of those themes that you shared of, the speed and the maturity kind of played into your story and how that aligns with the framework?
I think in my scenarios, there was this theme of resiliency, right? So from Salesforce's well architected framework, basically they define resilient as like a resilient solution will handle changes well. So if your solution can quickly recover from a problem or a failure, or if it's tough enough to handle, an increase in scope, or in this case, an increase in the deal size, then the solution would be relatively resilient. And it turns out like that was our thought process was aligned with Salesforce's well-architected framework around resiliency, which is a sub-theme of adaptable. And I think one thing that I didn't do earlier in the conversation, Arturo, was talk about like the core pillars of a well-architected solution, and that's trusted, easy, and adaptable. And that is from Salesforce's well-architected framework, those are the pillars that effectively define what a healthy solution is. What I was talking about more specifically in my sub-theme was around the resiliency, which is a sub-theme of an adaptable pillar in the well-architected framework. And then additionally, we were trying to do this in the first place because we wanted to make the solution easier for our customers. At the time, I think the order forms were about 5 pages long, and so we wanted to consolidate that to just like 1 or 2 pages. Again, customer CSMs were spending a bunch of hours a week manually sending out deals, and we had C-level executives signing deals that were relatively inconsequential given the rest of the deal sizes that were being signed. So there was a bunch of opportunity to make things easier and engaging and streamlined. And they might sound like buzzwords, but Salesforce does have a very you'd have strict definitions on what it means to be easy, engaging, and streamlined. In this case, streamlined applications from Salesforce's perspective they're easy to navigate and present information, and do it in a clear way. And so we were trying to streamline operations from the beginning, and like that is one of the core definitions of what it means to be a healthy solution, a healthy Salesforce solution. So those are just some of the ways that we saw our thought process align with Salesforce's well-architected framework, and some of the themes that we uncovered align with the well-architected framework. But Arturo, I'm curious from your side, what were some of the themes that you saw? Like, what did you find align with the well-architected framework from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Diego. I mean, I think, for us, some of the, the items that supported the easy pillar really impacted the culture. Like you were talking about, the streamline, the efficiency really drove the decisions for us. In this case, the cost of the product and the ability to have something that was adaptable from a managed package, that we were able to expand on it, really allowed us to have the adaptability that they required. And, the support, working with a lot of volunteers out in the community, trust was really important. If there was friction, if there was complexity, it would really break down that trust for their end users, the trust in the community that, they were being served and not being data managed. And so those things really fell into the well-architected as we kind of started seeing this framework come from Salesforce. But, one of the things is that these themes, this is how our themes apply to the scenarios that Diego and I shared. But for your organization, it may look a little bit different, right? The cost and support may be, across all three, whereas the culture may focus just on some of them. And so, as you're thinking through the well-architected framework and also these themes that may emerge, realize that it's going to be different for your organization, different for each project within an organization. But we hope that, I know we're getting close to time, but, we hope that this kind of really helped you find some speaking points of how to apply, the concepts of well-architected into your organizations, and definitely are open to answer any questions that y'all may have. Was there any themes or things that you've seen in projects that you've worked on that, you feel like there's a seventh bucket that we should have considered or whatnot? Diego, is there anything else you want to add to while we're waiting for questions to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Arturo, and thank you, Diego. So we are on time. So thank you so much for the talk. So yeah, it was great to hear.
Yep, and we're on LinkedIn and such, so please feel free to reach out if there are any questions that you have or want to discuss it further. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.